Let me invite all of us now to turn to Galatians chapter 2. Galatians chapter 2. We're going to pick it up in verse 19 here in just a moment, but last week we began a new series from Galatians. And as I've been reading through Galatians, there have been some words that have just kind of jumped out at me, and these words really are becoming kind of the focus of the series. So I want to highlight some of these words. Last week, we looked at the word astonished. And the idea is to live astonished by the gospel. We should live each day more aware of the gospel, more grateful for the gospel, more inspired, more empowered by the gospel. Today's message revolves around another word, and that word is crucified. Crucified. Let's look at our text here, Galatians 2, beginning in verse 19. For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, then Christ died for nothing. In verse 20, Paul makes this glorious declaration. It's so profound that many biblical scholars think it's his most mysterious proclamation ever. And it's this proclamation, I have been crucified with Christ. And many scholars call it so mysterious because they're not really sure what it means fully. The idea of this is so immense and so deep that it's hard to really understand everything that it means. But the idea is not simply being crucified. It's the idea of being crucified with Christ. Being crucified has little, if any, meaning or purpose just standing alone. The significance, the beauty of the concept of being crucified is the attachment that I've been crucified with Christ. Now this word crucify and crucified, it's all through Scripture, all through the Gospels and the New Testament, but it refers to Jesus and his crucifixion. But this other term where it relates to us, it's this spiritual concept of being crucified with Christ, that's only mentioned 4 times in Scripture. 3 of those times are here in the book of Galatians. So Jesus as crucified, I think is a very clear concept for us. But what does it mean to be crucified with Christ? Well, the 2 ideas are very similar, but there are some very distinct differences. One, being crucified physically is a way to die, but being crucified spiritually is a way to live. Secondly, being crucified physically is not the best way to die, but being crucified spiritually is the best way to live. 3, being crucified physically is just a one-time event, but being crucified spiritually is, I think, an ongoing event. It's a daily event. It's a moment-by-moment decision. So what does this great declaration mean? What does it mean? I have been crucified with Christ. Well, let me start with just a broad definition, kind of a big picture definition. And I want to give you a word picture, so I have brought my trimmer with me. Now, there's nothing significant about this trimmer. There's nothing special about the trimmer. It's just, I think, a really good word picture where we talk about being crucified with Christ, because this is my new trimmer. I've only had it a few weeks. I had an old trimmer, and I had it for about 10 years. But my old trimmer was electric, but it was an extension cord. I didn't have a battery. I just got one with an extension cord. I didn't understand the issue that was going to create. So every time I had to trim, I had to get out the extension cord, I had to unroll it, I had to hook it up, do all that sort of thing. I noticed, though, that as I would edge the yard, my extension cord kept getting in the cut line. So I'd have to stop and I'd have to move the extension cord so I could finish cutting. When I would cut around from the sidewalk and then make the turn and go up the driveway, the extension cord would always get stuck right there in the corner of the grass. Wouldn't go any farther. So I always have to come and I have to adjust the extension cord so I can keep trimming. When I'd go to the side of the house to trim, the cord would go underneath some bushes in our flower bed, And every single time, it would get hooked on those bushes in the flower bed. So I had to come back and I had to pull the extension cord off of the flower bed. Most of the time, Denise and I do the yard work together. So there'd be times I'm out in the front trying to edge and she's in the front starting to mow, but because the cord's all over the yard, either she has to stop mowing or I have to run around and try to move the extension cord. I did that for 10 years. Don't ask me why. Maybe I'm stubborn, maybe I'm cheap, maybe I'm both, I don't know. But the issue wasn't just the extension cord. About, 4 or 5 years ago, the little spool, the spool's the deal on the bottom that holds the twine, spins, it does, etc., releases it for you. The little top part of the spool where you would kind of tie it on, because I would have to, do other twine. You run out and you have to refill it. So there was a way with this little hook that you hook it in. It keeps it tight so you can keep the string tight. Well, 4 or 5 years ago, that little piece broke. And so the twine would not stay tight. Now, right when I initially would roll it up, it would be tight, but because it wouldn't stay tight, it just starts getting loose, and it would cut like every 5 seconds. It's extending and cutting, extending and cutting. So I'd basically get through 1 or 2 edging days, and I had to retwine it. Well, what was bad is about halfway through the twine, it gets so loose that it just starts spinning, it starts coming loose, it starts getting long, and it just flies off. Well, about 3 months ago, and by the way, I did that for 4 or 5 years. Can you believe that? A few months ago, the guard broke. And the guard is called a guard for a reason. Well, I kept using it without the guard for several months. Finally, about, it was a couple of weeks ago now, I was edging. I didn't have the guard on. The spool, the twine did its thing, and it starts doing whatever it's doing. It starts loosening, it starts getting real long. It's spinning, it's about to shoot off, and I'm trying to do my work. I don't know how it happened, but it gets long enough that it actually cuts both of my hands. So I throw this down on the ground in panic and pain. My hands are bleeding, and finally I throw it down and I say, okay, enough is enough. I'm done with this. I'm throwing it away. I'm not picking up, and I actually went and threw it in the dumpster. The idea is it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and finally I said, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. This is a pretty good word picture about what it means to be crucified with Christ. The broad meaning is this: I have been living one way, and it's not working well. So I've decided to live a better way, a different way. That's the broad stroke. Paul called it no longer living by the law, I'm living by grace. What does it mean for us to be crucified with Christ? Well, let me break it down a little bit. That's our big picture. I was living one way, I'm not living that way anymore. I'm going to live this way. What does that mean practically? Let me give you a few things that it speaks to, and all these concepts kind of interlink together. So first, being crucified with Christ speaks to consecration. It speaks to your consecration. Verse 20 says, Christ lives in me. I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. That infers for Paul that there was a time when Christ did not live in Paul. It also infers that now that Christ does live in Paul, something is different. He is now consecrated. And the same is true for all of us. When we were crucified with Christ, we were consecrated. That means we were set apart. When we gave our life to Christ at this point of salvation, at that point, we were set apart. We were set apart from sin, and we were set apart for God. We were consecrated. Romans 6, verses 6 and 7 is one of the other passages that talk about being crucified with Christ. And it says, for we know that our old self was crucified with Him so that the body of sin might be done away with. Because anyone who has died has been freed from sin. Being crucified with Christ means I have died to sin. I've been set apart from sin. I have been freed, immediately freed from the penalty of sin. Through the Spirit living in me, I am becoming more and more free from the power of sin. And one day when I go to eternity in glory, I'm going to be freed from the presence of sin. I've been set apart from sin. When Christ was crucified, I put my faith in Him. My sins were washed away. I was set apart, and that stain of sin was removed. There may be a time when you've been doing laundry and maybe there's a stain on a piece of clothing. So you get that detergent and you rub that in on the piece of clothing, wash it, and it's clean. That's what happened at salvation. Christ was crucified. You put your faith in Christ. The blood of Christ covers that stain of sin, and now you've been washed white. So to be crucified with Christ first means that I've been consecrated. It speaks to consecration, but secondly, it speaks to association. It speaks to an association, if you will. Verse 20 says, I'm crucified with Christ. It does not say I've been crucified for Christ. I've been crucified with Christ. That connotation of with is an association. It means to have communion with, to have companionship with. So it means I have association with Christ now. I have chosen to associate myself with Jesus Christ. I have chosen to be treated the way that Jesus was treated. I've chosen to identify myself with Jesus Christ. In Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse 24, the writer talks about Moses. And he puts Moses' story in this kind of spiritual context, kind of in a New Testament context, if you will. But we remember the story of Moses. His mom, to save his life, puts him in the basket, puts him in the river. Pharaoh's daughter finds him, takes him home. So in that context, we see Hebrews 11:24. It says, when Moses grew up, he refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt. It's interesting that Hebrews brings Christ into the equation here as it's talking about Moses. But this is this spiritual tie-in that we're talking about. Moses seemingly had everything. He had riches, he had power, he had notoriety, he had all the comforts of life, he had servants waiting on him all the time. He had the best education, he had access to really the best of everything. But Moses gave all of that up. Even though it meant to live in disgrace, he chose to identify with God and the people of God. It brought disgrace. It even created trouble, even though it meant losing and leaving all of that stuff that he had. What we see is that Moses chose God over Pharaoh. Moses chose God over pleasure. Moses chose God over treasure. Moses chose God over sin. He even chose association with God instead of association with the world. This is a great picture for what it means for us to be crucified with Christ. It means I have chosen to be identified with Christ. I identify as His, and I will associate with Him regardless of what it brings to my life. Regardless if it brings disgrace, even if it means giving up worldly comforts, even if it means bringing hardship or persecution or whatever, I will choose to associate with Jesus Christ. I'm going to be His companion. I will have communion with Him. I know I've said this part of the story before. I shared this before, that Denise and I, we ride bikes as part of our little workout routine. Well, a week ago or so, we were in our bike ride. We're about halfway through, and we hear this just loud bang. It's like an explosion, and it was so close. Well, I looked down, and Denise's tire had exploded. It had blown out, not just the tube. I'm talking about the tire too. The whole thing just completely blew out. Fortunately, it was her back tire, so it didn't cause her to lose balance. She was able to stop, and we took it out and we looked. We realized, okay, she can't ride this bike anymore. So she gets off her bike, and she's going to have to walk it home. So I get off my bike, and I walked my bike with her. But I could have said, you know what? That's your bike. That's your problem. Your tire blew out, not my tire. This doesn't have to affect me. I could have very easily gotten on my bike and ridden to the house and said, you're on your own. I'll see you at the house. Now, that would have been a huge mistake. But I could have done it. I could have said, hey, that's you, and this has no effect on me. But instead, I chose to associate with her so that even though the flat happened to her, I responded as if it happened to me. That's what it means to have the association being crucified with Christ. Jesus was crucified, and I could say, that's a Jesus thing. That has no impact on me. And I could have continued to live my life as if that was of no effect in my life. But to be crucified with Christ says, okay, that happened to Christ, but I'm going to live as if it happened to me. I've been crucified with Christ. He gave his life for me, so in return, I will give my life for him. Association. Here's the third thing I think it means to be crucified with Christ, and that speaks to expiration. Think expiration date. Think your expiration date. You have expired. Verse 20 says, I no longer live. I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. My life has expired. Not physically, but this sense of spiritually. My life has come to an end. What it's saying is I have come to the end of living for self. Dying to self is much better than living for self. I've determined that dying to sin is much better than dying in sin. I've come to determine that I'm at the end of depending on myself, depending on my works and my own goodness and etc. I've died to myself so that I can live for him. Jesus spoke about this in Matthew 16:25. He said, whoever wants to save his life, he's going to lose it. But whoever loses his life for me, he's the one that will find it. So speaking spiritually, life comes from death. Jesus Christ was crucified, and from his death, we have gained life. And the same is true for us in this commitment to be crucified for Christ. It's in my death, it's in my willing to die to self, that now I can experience true life as I live for Christ. But fourth, I think it means the fourth thing. Living by faith speaks to what I'm calling transformation, to a glorious transformation. Verse 20, he says, I live by faith in the Son of God. I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. Christ lives in me. And I live in the body. And this life I live in the body, he says, I live by faith in the Son of God. You could insert the word now. You could say, I live in the body, but now I live by faith in the Son of God. What Paul is saying is, this is something different. The way I live has changed. Now, I didn't used to live by faith, but now things have changed. I've been transformed, and so now I live by faith. And I think this transformation speaks to two areas. There's two concepts attached. One, it means what I live for has been transformed. What I live for has been transformed. I shared earlier that there are two other places in Galatians that talk about this concept, being crucified with Christ, where they both speak to this concept right here, what I live for. Galatians 6:14 is one of those passages. It says, the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. Galatians 5:24 says, those who belong to Jesus Christ have crucified the sinful nature with its passions and its desires. What it's saying is, I no longer live the way I used to. I no longer live for the things that I used to. Now, I'm going to live for Christ. I'm not living for the world. I'm not living for myself anymore. I'm not living for the pleasures of sin any longer. I'm not living for my own glory and my own recognition. I'm not living anymore to fulfill the cravings of my fleshly desires. I am now living for Christ. What I live for has been transformed. But it also means what I live by has been transformed. I'm living a different way. In our previous series, Unseen, we talked about this concept of not living by sight, but living by faith and what that means. What it means now is I'm going to live my life in faith in Him. The way I live has been transformed. I'm no longer trusting in my own reasoning, my own wisdom. I'm rather going to walk in faith and live by faith. When I connect these dots, what it means to live by faith, connect that with what it means to be crucified with Christ, to me, this is what it's saying. Living by faith means that I have crucified my need to be in control. And we'll talk more about that probably next week, but simply stated, it means that I'm willing to be led rather than having to lead my life. Living by faith also means I've crucified my insistence to know exactly what God is up to. I no longer have to know exactly what He's doing right now. I can be in a situation that I don't understand what God's doing. Maybe I don't even like what God's doing. I don't like what's going on. It's a hard time. It's a difficult time. But living by faith, being crucified with Christ means I don't have to know what He's doing. It can be a negative situation. I don't have to know because I have faith in God. I trust Him. I know that He's not going to allow anything in my life that's not going to be turned for good, that He's going to use whatever's happening and make it good. I trust His heart. I trust His motivation. I trust His power. I have faith in all of that He's doing, so I don't have to know exactly. I don't have to have all of my questions answered to follow Him and to serve Him and to walk with Him, because now I'm living by faith. So I don't have to know all of what He's doing right this moment. Also, living by faith means I've crucified my need to know the next 10 steps. What God's going to do next year and the 5 years and the 10 years and the final end story. I don't have to know all of that. All I have to know is the next step. I'm just fine just letting you tell me the next step. I know I've talked about this illustration before, but I'm going to repeat it a little bit just because I think it's very appropriate. And there's a kind of epiphany that happened with me as well. I told you before, sometimes when Denise and I are coming back home, we've been eating out or shopping or whatever, we're about to get home, sometimes Denise will say, "Hey, I want to show you something." And so the very first question I would ask is, "Okay, where are we going? What do you want to show me?" She never tells me. All she will tell me is the next step. She just says, "Well, just go straight." Or she'll say, "Turn right at the stop sign." Well, before, I used to really want her to tell me, where are we going? Because I'm the type of person, I want to know the final destination. I want to be in control. I want to be driving this vehicle. So just tell me where we're going, and I can and I can get there. But she says, "No, just turn right." Well, I've discovered something that now I don't really care if she tells me, because I've noticed, only knowing the next step, I have to stay in a listening posture with her. I have to stay attentive to what she's going to say next. It keeps me engaged with her. I can't just blank out and just go and do my thing. I'm now so much more engaged because I'm waiting for her to tell me, "Okay, what's the next step?" And I've discovered that's the way it is with God. Why doesn't God tell us what's going to happen down the road? Why doesn't He give us the last step so we can just go and do our thing? I've discovered that when we live by faith and we're content to God, just give me the next step, what it does is it keeps me in a listening posture with God. It keeps me attuned to the Spirit of God speaking to me. It keeps me engaged with what God is doing and what God is saying. That's what living by faith, that's what being willing to be crucified. I don't have to know the next step. Just tell me the very next step. It speaks to transformation. What I live for and what I live by. Here's the final one. It also speaks to determination. It puts in this spirit, I am determined to live this way. He says in verse 21, I do not set aside the grace of God. There was a time when Paul did not live by the grace of God. There was a time he did not understand the grace of God. He understood living in righteousness. He understood the law. He understood goodness. He understood trying to do everything he could to earn his way. But he didn't understand grace. But when Paul came to understand grace, he fell in love with grace. And now he says, I do not set aside the grace of God. You could insert the phrase, I will not set aside the grace of God. For us, it means I'm dead, I've died, and I'm determined to stay that way. My life's been transformed, and I'm living a different way than I used to live, and I'm determined I'm not ever going back to that way of life anymore. I'm not going to revert to my previous mindset, my previous lifestyle. I'm determined. I've been crucified, and I'm living for Christ. I'm living this new way. No turning back, no returning back, no reverting back. We're done. There was I call it a chorus. Some people call it a hymn. But it was written about 150 years ago. But nobody really knew much about it then. It was kind of revived. It was rediscovered, kind of rewritten and arranged. And it became very popular, sung all the time in the 1960s, 1970s. Some of you have no idea about that time because you weren't even a thought of yet. But some of you will remember this. The chorus is called, I Have Decided to Follow Jesus. Now, I'm not going to sing it for you, but here are just the highlights of some of the verses. Verse 1, I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. Verse 2, the world behind me and the cross before me. No turning back. Verse 3, though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back. Verse 4, my cross I'll carry until I see Jesus. No turning back. That's the mindset of being crucified with Christ. I had an old, beat up, horrible trimmer. I threw it in the dumpster. I am not retrieving it. I've got a new one. My life's been transformed. I'm not ever going back to the old one. No longer am I going to live for sin or live for self or live for treasure, live for pleasure. No longer am I going to trust in my own goodness, my own righteousness, It's all about Christ. I've been crucified with Christ. I will live by faith in Him. I will walk by grace in Him. I've been crucified with Christ.